Good morning. We are back on the record. The time is 9 a.m. and the date is February 1st, 2023. The commission and its staff are appearing from Helena, Montana, in the Bollinger Room of the Montana Public Service Commission. We have Commissioner O'Donnell, Commissioner Pinocci, President James Brown, and Commissioner Annie Lukacek joining me, Commissioner Fielder. This day. This is day 2 for the public hearing in docket number 2022.06.067, Northwestern Energy's application for approval of an advanced metering opt-out tariff. We will now go to public comment. Are there any public commenters who have not commented yet? Would like to comment? Are there any in the room? Seeing none. Are there any public commenters online? Seeing none, we will go ahead and move on. We are going to continue with witness John Thurmond. Mr. Thurmond, you've been sworn in and we are just going to continue our cross-examination. When we ran out of time yesterday, I was questioning you and I have a few more to follow up on, and then we're going to turn it over to our commission staff for some questions. First of all, I am a little bit confused about when you began work with Northwestern Energy. You say in your testimony that it was 2 years ago, but can you tell us specifically when you came to work for Northwestern Energy?
Oh, yes. I've been with the utility for 30 plus years, I believe, going on 32 this year. So when I responded back in my testimony on the 2 years, that was in my role as the program manager overseeing AMI, the metering project, and AMI operations.
Okay. And can you tell us when you started that role with the company?
Overseeing the AMI operations in 2021 or 2020. 2020. Yeah, going on 3 years, and it would be this year.
Do you remember the date or the month that you started?
I believe it was the January or February timeframe 3 years ago. We were in South Dakota at that time.
January or February of 2021?
2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a few questions relating to some of the testimony that you gave regarding Northwestern's desire to meet customer expectations. I noticed that you mentioned that several times.
Yes, I'm very passionate about serving our customers.
Okay, great. So are we. Do you know how many customers said they wanted AMI infrastructure, advanced meters installed?
No, I do not know how many customers requested an AMI meter.
Do you know of any that requested one?
I have had net metering customers that have requested that capability or functionality of the meter. Specifically what that can deliver from a net metering perspective. Yes, that's the only ones I recall because they're looking for the capabilities of those meters.
Do you remember how many?
I could not recall off the top of my head. I would say a handful to maybe 10 right in there that I'd spoken to or have talked with about the functionality of those meters in regards to net metering.
So maybe a handful to a dozen that indicated their desire to have an advanced meter?
In regards to net metering, yes. There's been other customers that have received an AMI meter, not saying that they'd asked for one, and then asked for their information regarding what those meters can provide to them.
My question has to do with how many customers asked for AMI.
I could not tell you how many customers requested an AMI meter.
Can you tell me how many customers have asked not to have an AMI meter?
I can reference the number of customers that have asked a voluntary bypass, which is roughly 2,596, I believe.
So is it fair to say that quite a few more have asked not to have it than have asked to have an AMI?
I don't know if I would say that's fair just because they haven't reached out to it. Doesn't mean that maybe they did not want an AMI. The ones we heard from were the ones that specifically had concerns with the AMI meter. So I wouldn't say that that's necessarily fair.
Well, I'm trying to get at what's driving your statements about meeting customer expectations and how you have come to the conclusion that introducing an AMI meter to every single Northwestern customer would meet customer expectations. I know that you've discussed some of the technology, but it seems to me that the concerns of 2,000 plus customers have been dismissed or not taken seriously.
No, we've honored those requests in our voluntary bypass program. And when I spoke about customers' requests from like a JD Power survey or Flynn Wright and customers informing us, I don't know the numbers, to be much better as a utility to inform them with outage communications, restoration, other customer facing benefits. But taking that into consideration too, that we took on the opportunity to replace aging infrastructure, our AMR meters.
I understand.
And we could have went down the path of continuing to do that or take on the option or the opportunity, to enhance the customer experience, move our utility metering infrastructure to utility standards being AMI, as we've seen many kind of utilities across North America have done that, as well as supporting the digital transformation of the utility sector and bringing digital processes into the business.
So is this more about updating the technology than replacing units that are at end of life? I mean, what's more important here to you?
To me, we took on the opportunity that we were facing aging infrastructure of our assets from a metering perspective.
So
even if we were not, we would still be replacing them. Even if we didn't choose AMI, we chose the option of going down the path of enhancing the customer experience.
I understand that that's what you did. I'm just trying to figure out, going back to our conversation yesterday where we referred to your testimony that 55% of the AMR, which are the existing meters,
Yes,
were at or near end of life, or would reach end of life by 2030. So we're saying 55% would definitely reach end of life by 2030, correct?
correct.
Okay. And then the other 45% wouldn't reach end of life by 2030, correct?
70% of our meters have reached 50% of their expected life. And I believe it's less than 50% roughly in there have reached their expected end of life or will in the near future.
But even if they haven't reached end of life or aren't approaching end of life, they have more than 7 years of life left in them, you're still recommending that they be replaced at this time, correct?
That is correct.
And that is primarily because of the desire to install this new technology. Is that correct?
And not to allow assets to run to failure. We have to take on that initiative. It's not prudent or providing reliable and safe service to allow assets just to fail. It's not like the same as maybe a light bulb failing in your house versus a meter failing.
Okay.
So we took on the opportunity with assets reaching end of life or potential end of life in the near future, to take the opportunity to either, we could stay on that path with AMR, or do we take on the opportunity to enhance the customer experience, bring our metering infrastructure up to utility standards, being AMI, as we've seen many utilities across North America do that, as well as supporting the digital transformation in the utility sector.
Okay. So is it true that even though a significant number of meters are not at or near end of life, that you are recommending and want to replace them with AMI at this point?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. When the AMIs reach at or near end of life, say they become 13 years old and have 7 years left, is it the intention of Northwestern to replace them at that point?
I'm assuming it would be relevant to what technology is out there. AMI, I'm assuming we'd still replace an AMI meter with an AMI meter.
So it's you haven't made that decision on when you will replace this new generation of AMIs in regards to their life expectancy.
We would not allow them to go to failure. At what point? I don't know what specifically that point would be, but again, you don't want to allow our assets to go to the point of failure.
Okay. In your testimony, you also discussed the benefits of the AMIs for customers, and undoubtedly there are some benefits. But I noticed that when you discussed the benefits in your testimony, you talked about how the meters could perform remote services such as turning power on for new or relocating customers outside of business hours.
That is correct.
But I noticed that you didn't mention that the remote services could turn people's power off. Did you not think that was a benefit?
That is a benefit. If that was an oversight on my part, I apologize for that, but that is a benefit of these meters, not all meters, such as the larger, what we call polyphase or commercial meters. Those ones you cannot turn off remotely. Only the ones that we consider like in the residential have that functionality, but there is benefits to that as well.
Okay.
And I guess I'd expand on that because I think typically we think a disconnect is just shutting off power, maybe in a non-pay situation, right? But what about if a customer that wants to relocate or move out? Because we do get requests from customers that we're moving out. You know, what is my final bill? And under AMR technology, it can take days to get a read, to get that and process it versus an AMI. We could get that read more timely, close out that request of our customers and have a better interaction with that customer. So I just don't want to leave the intention that a disconnect is just to shut off power. There's cases where shutting off power is on the customer's request.
Sure. So using remote technology, using AMIs to remotely shut off people's power can be beneficial.
Yes,
Correct.
absolutely.
Okay. So why does Northwestern not mention in any of its literature that we can use these AMIs to shut off power? Do you think that maybe that's because it might trigger concerns in customers?
I don't think it would trigger concerns with customers to do that. We still have to follow what's in the rules and communicate with our customers, give them notice before we do a disconnect, tag the door. We still have to follow all those rules. I'm not sure why that would be a concern. Anything we do with AMI from a disconnect is not in lieu of what's in rules.
Okay, so you're unaware of any customers that would have concerns with the utility shutting off their power remotely then?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, I'd like to move on to, I want to understand this program that's being proposed and why the AMRs don't seem to be a viable option. It seems that Northwestern's going to great lengths in its interpretation of our rule and of the statute to exclude AMRs. And so basically what I'm reading into this is that Northwestern is saying you either get an AMI or we'll give you an analog reader that has to be manually read, but leaving customers with the AMR is not a viable option in Northwestern's opinion. Is that correct?
That is correct. Okay,
now why is that specifically, please?
Because again, those meters are an end of life on those assets are going to replace it. And also,
could you please restate that, clarify that? I didn't quite understand what you said.
I apologize. Could you state the question again?
Yes, I'd like to know why Northwestern's view is that the AMRs cannot be left in place for you heard Representative Fielder's comment yesterday about the intent of his legislation that people could just keep the meter they have now, but Northwestern's position is no, they can't. I'd like to know why that won't work.
From a mesh perspective, when you deploy AMI, and I will get to your question in a roundabout way, AMI technology, and we've learned from lessons learned in our deployment in South Dakota, you place AMI endpoints by geographical location around what we call a router, right? Or it is what it is, a router. Place geographically out in our service territories for those endpoints to communicate. And those endpoints, by geographical location of that endpoint, communicate back to our facilities, and also allows us to communicate back to those meters. When you have AMR meters or pockets of them in those areas, it prevents that mesh from forming or limits the ability to communicate using that technology. It can impact that.
I understand. Wouldn't the analog meters do the same thing, have the same effect?
Analog being the non-communicating?
Yes. The alternative Northwestern has proposed. Forgive me if I'm using the wrong term.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, they would not be part of the mesh either.
Okay, so it's a wash. The AMR and the analog, or the meters Northwestern is proposing, have the same effect on the mesh, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So I guess I'm not understanding why Northwestern is opposed to allowing people to keep their AMRs. Can you explain that?
Our thing on my response from Northwestern Energy was my understanding, maybe we get to it on the two-way communications on an AMR meter, that what is in Montana Code 69.1.1001, two-way communicating meters are advanced meters having two-way communication using internet or radio waves, right? Can I expand upon that in my response yesterday?
I know what your response is regarding the statute and the rule. I know what Northwestern's position is on that. That's clear. You feel the AMRs don't meet the rule or the statute, which has been challenged. And I'm just trying to understand from a practical standpoint why Northwestern doesn't want to have customers retain AMRs that still have plenty of life left on them. Why is that?
Because it's a replacement of the end of the asset, right? I know they can opt out. Our response to what was required was to provide a non-communicating digital meter. And my response yesterday on the two-way communication, that some AMR meters could meet the definition of an advanced meter.
So there's two reasons why you don't want customers to retain AMRs. One is because they're not part of the mesh. And two is because you believe that they don't fit within the statutory definition.
Correct. And they're also an asset that could be reaching the end of their life.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. I think we're going to move on to, unless Commissioner Bukacek came up with any questions.
I have a complex question. It combines direct testimony from Dr. Dismusk. I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, and also Matthew Holden and Cynthia Fang. So it's kind of it's a little bit of a complex question. And if you want to defer it, I think it is the question.
I'll listen to the question. If I defer it, I'll defer.
All right.
Thank you.
So it has to do with some practical matters about the administrative rule 38.5.2603. It looks like in the first paragraph of that. So number one, it says electric and natural gas utilities shall provide customers with.
Yes. Remember,
talk fast.
the court recorder has to record every word.
Electric and natural gas utilities shall provide customers with the option to remove an installed advanced metering device and replace it with an alternative meter approved by the commission, or to decline installation of an advanced metering device and retain the existing meter as guided by a cost-based opt-out service tariff. So that seems to be the same as voluntary bypass. If they're allowed to keep theirs, it seems it's the same, and this is the administrative rule. So it seems like that's part of the rule. So that's one of the practical matters I'd like addressed. And then the other thing is, in number 6, it says utilities should include at least one alternative type of meter that does not use radio waves or internet technology to measure, record, or send a customer's utility usage information. And they use the word should, not must. And then it says, if a utility cannot provide such an alternative, the utility must state the reasons why, and the commission will examine all viable alternative meter reading options available. So these are two practical matters that I'm not sure how well they've been addressed. And I looked up, some of the non-radio frequency. I mean, even the old-fashioned meters, with two coils and a magnet and all that. I mean, that puts out radio frequency as well. So even the old-fashioned ones, which from my understanding, that's the same as the analog meter, puts out some radio frequency, but it's about 60 hertz as compared to 900 hertz to 245, 2,450 hertz, which is on the smart meter. So it's a 15 million amount, but it's still radio frequency. And then the AMRs, as opposed to the AMIs, they still have radio frequency. So if people are if they're keeping their old fashioned analog meter, if those still exist, then they're still getting some radio frequency. So I think that's important.
Commissioner Bukacek,
Yes.
is there a question in here for the witness?
There is. It's
Okay,
the
let's-
practical matters. But I think it's important because I looked up, finding one of those old fashioned meters and you could find them on eBay, but anyway, they refurbished them. So my question is, from a practical standpoint, would you agree, get into my question, would you agree that paragraph 1, that they are requiring the same as a voluntary bypass when they say the customer has the option to decline installation of an advanced metering device and retain the existing meter?
I will defer that to testimony of Matt Holden.
Okay, do you have any further questions, Commissioner Bukacek?
This would probably be for Matt as well, my next question. And then, so
Well,
as far as
Commissioner Bukacek,
Yes.
if you have a question for another witness, you'll have to wait till that witness is on the stand.
yes,
if
I
you
have
have
one more for John.
Okay,
So as far as I appreciate that you want to address customer concerns and you have a passion for that. And I just wanted to ask you if that's going to include, that there is evidence suggestive of adverse health effects of these meters. Will that be included?
My response is yes, that's, we have the opt-out ruling. That's why we're taking into consideration. And when you mentioned, should provide an alternative meter that does not use radio frequency or internet to communicate, that is one of the reasons why we proposed a non-communicating digital meter.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
okay, thank you. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to begin with a couple of questions that try to clarify responses to data requests. So do we have a way to get responses to MCC 17 and MCC 32? All right. Do you have MCC 17 in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I believe it's in MCC 17A, where you discuss the staff that's qualified to perform meter reading tasks. Do you see that?
In 17A?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Can you describe for me what it takes to be qualified to perform a meter reading task at Northwestern?
My understanding of that is that I couldn't get into all the details of what is actually certified to do that, but we have individuals that are trained to go out, use the equipment that we're giving them to read the meter. So such as AMR and AMI, those tools they're trained on to communicate with the meter, enter it properly, and also to take that information from the meter and correctly enter it into what I would call a digital service order on their tablet, and then send that back to our utilities.
So there's training involved to become qualified to perform a meter reading task. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And how long does that training take?
I could not speak to the length of that training.
Thank you. Could you turn now to MCC 32? All right. So do you have MCC 32A in front of you in particular?
Yes, sir.
I believe it's MCC 32A that discusses a cost of about $4.04 a month to perform self-reading tasks or for the back office to enter information from self-reading tasks. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Could you describe for me what the back office tasks are?
Sure, they would have, excuse me for clearing my throat. Our back office, which is, I consider part of like our revenue or billing group, they would have to take that data from whatever channel that was received from the customer, take that information, enter it into what we call our customer information system, our CIS, our billing system. That is a manual process they would have to do versus AMR today, where we go out and cycle read or read routes. That gets uploaded, excuse me, automatically and then processed in the system. This would be on an individual basis to process those reads.
In your answer there, you mentioned different channels. Could you describe what you mean by channels?
They call in, go over like a customer portal, my energy account, that they go in there, fill that out is what we're proposing, enter that read and get it back to the utility.
So the channel in your mind is just the method through which the customer communicates to Northwestern their read.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are there any other costs involved with the self-reading?
From the self-read, not the audit. Not to my knowledge, no.
So if the monthly cost of self-reading is $4.04, why has Northwestern proposed a $5 per month charge?
I can't speak to why that is off the top of my head. I'm assuming there must be out of the cost. I have to look at that. I can see where you're going there. 404 is a part of the back billing office. I'm trying to think what else was in my testimony to process a meter read. Okay. Oh, thank you. I apologize, sir. What we include on a per month basis is that we would have to go out there and do an annual verification or audit on those reads. So that cost spread over 12 months would bring the total cost to, I believe, $9.45. That annual audit coming out at $5.45 was why we were asking for the $5. So I apologize when I said there's only the 404. That's the monthly back office. The additional cost is for the annual verification or the audit to go out and read that meter.
I understand, and thank you for that clarification. I see that you're referring to a specific page. Could you, for the record, tell me what page that is we should refer to?
It's exhibit JPT 5.
JPT 5. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Hamilton, for the record, it's also in his testimony on JPT 16.
Thank you. Moving on, then I don't think we'll need to refer to the data responses anymore. So thank you for bringing those up.
Thank you, Bobby.
Do I understand your testimony correctly that Northwestern does currently have meters in the field that are past the end of their asset life, the 20-year asset life that you've described?
Yes, there is.
But because they're not at the point of failure, Northwestern has not replaced them. Is that right?
We've proactively tried to replace those meters, but obviously not all those meters have been replaced.
Okay. How do you make the determination then, once you know that a meter is beyond its asset life, that it is prudent to go out and replace it?
I believe our process is from our meter reading shop is that you do a electric field meter test on the sampling of those meters on an annual basis. I know that was put on hold during COVID, and it is scheduled to start again to go out and look at those meters. So with COVID-19 starting in 2020, that audit was placed on hold to go look at those meters.
Okay. I'd like to try to clarify the difference between Northwestern's current AMR meters and the AMI meters that involve two-way communication, because I believe yesterday your testimony was that some of your AMR meters will bubble up and those involve two-way communication. Is that correct?
No, bubble up ones, and if I misstated that, they're the ones that they're constantly communicating. They're always sending information on a very frequent basis. The ones that I would consider in my response being two-way communications are the ones that have to wake up.
Okay. So could you describe for me how the two-way AMR meters are read?
Sure, bubble up or wake up or both.
Sorry, I thought you just said that a bubble up is not a two-way communicating meter.
Under the definition, to me, no, it's not, but they're still read. If you're asking me to explain how they're both read.
No, just the two-way
Sure.
AMRs.
Under our meter reading process on AMR meters, we get a route of meters that we're looking to cycle bill. We load that to a mobile unit or a radio in a vehicle. They go out, they drive the route. That specific ERT gets a radio signal from that mobile unit, which it accepts and it responds by passing back basic meter information. And that's when my response yesterday, under a technical maybe, or how I see that is two-way. It's initiated from the device to that endpoint reacts to that request, versus bubble up meters or ones that are constantly communicating. We drive by, we pick up that information.
So is it fair to say that the bubble up AMR meters are what you would consider to be a one-way communicating meter?
Yes.
Okay. Are those bubble up one-way communicating meters still being manufactured, to your knowledge?
Yes.
Is it possible for Northwestern to source those bubble up AMR meters?
When you say source, what's on our system?
To acquire them from a manufacturer and then bring them into your system?
My understanding is yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. Last point for clarification, I believe. You've discussed, I believe it's page 5 of your direct testimony, some of the forecasting benefits of AMI. Do you recall that testimony?
Can you be more specific, please, on page 5?
I believe I can. Hold on one second. The paragraph that runs from line 9 through 13, I believe, ends in a discussion of bill forecasting.
Okay. Yes, sir.
All right. So bill forecasting, could you describe for me what bill forecasting is?
Oh, yes. What we look at that too is like bill alerts or notifications. Because today with AMR meters, we go out and we get one read per month. We cycle bill, right? And then we produce a bill statement. And sometimes that's, maybe there could be sticker shock or there's concerns, which leads to interactions back to the utility when they get that bill. But with AMI technology, that if you can take that interval data or meter data, and present that back to a customer to give them, usage alerts or potential bill alerts. I'll give you the example of, I might be a customer and I want to set up a bill alert that, hey, Northwestern Energy, I'd really only like to have $150 bill. I'd like to be notified if I'm getting close to that, right? So if we have that data back, we can give that back to our consumers and say, it's 3 weeks into the month and your calculated usage or amount owed could potentially be $135 at this point. So that the customer understands that, oh, okay, it's an alert. Maybe I can make informed decisions as a consumer. And they get that information to them versus we kind of call that no sticker shock or no bill surprises.
Okay. You mentioned in your answer there interval data.
Mm-hmm.
What is interval data?
Sure. So the meters we have with AMI, excuse me, I got too close there. AMI meters, there's a register, which is a cumulative of what's being passed through the meter or consumed by the customer. Interval data on an AMI meter is what's recorded in that time period or what's consumed in a certain time period. So for our residential customers, that interval is on a 60-minute basis. So what we can get down with the benefits of AMI meters is that we can also get to we can give them the information to understand maybe where their consumption's happening on an hourly basis. So you can say like, maybe at this time on a frequent basis, this is what's happening here in the house. We're not going past the meter, but consumer, it's like, you could look at the data to say, why am I using so much maybe consistently during this time period, and look at it and make informed decisions.
So a residential customer would have 1 hour intervals of their energy usage available to them.
Yes, sir.
Would Northwestern also have that data available to itself for its own purposes of forecasting load or any other use?
Yes, sir.
Does that require the AMI meter to transmit the interval data to Northwestern on those same intervals?
No, great question too. So as I mentioned previously, we read our meters 3 times per day. Yep.
So your AMI only transmits that interval data as part of a meter read that happens 3 times a day.
Yes, sir. It's doing like an 8-hour look back. So it's not like the meters every hour are transmitting. We go to read that meter, we ask them to pass back the 8 hours of the previous interval. Just during that very short interrogation, it's very quick. So it's not communicating every hour. We just do it 3 times a day, 8-hour look back, 24 hours in a day. So we can give customers their interval data over the 24 hours.
Okay. So just to confirm, the AMI meter transmits data only 3 times a day, even though it collects data more frequently than that.
Correct. From a reading perspective, that's our request to the meters. Yes.
Okay. I think that answers my question, but just to confirm, is there any other non-meter reading transmission of data out of an AMI?
The one that I can think of is what we consider like an alarm on the meter. There's configurations of the meter, and these are things that are set up, and one of them could be like a high temperature alarm. So that alarms, they're just defined that as they happen, pass that back near real time.
A high temperature alarm refers to the temperature of the meter?
Yeah, the temperature of the meter, that temperature of the meter. So that's one of we define as alarm. So that comes back near real time as they happen.
So the AMI meter will report meter reading data 3 times a day. It could also report an alarm if programmed to, outside of those 3 meter reads.
That is correct.
Is there any other type of reporting or transmission of data out of an AMI besides those 2 categories?
I would say under normal circumstances, no, unless there's a request of the utility to go get that, such as like a customer inquiry today. Hey, I might have questions. We might go back to look at that from a perspective to give more information to a customer, or from maybe an engineering perspective on load profile, what's happening. That's not a common thing that happens, but it's an infrequent thing that we look at, that if we have to pull the information, we would do that.
Okay, so the infrequent sort of extraordinary circumstance is either at the customer's request or at Northwestern's initiation based on engineering needs.
That is correct.
Okay, so 3 categories there, and beyond those 3 categories, no other communication out of the AMI.
I'm thinking through it, Tara. I just want to make sure I answered correctly here. I think that's it. I can't think of anything you do other than those ones.
Okay. Last follow-up on this line of questioning, I think. Can Northwestern change the frequency of the AMI meter reading from 3 times a day to a greater number of times a day or a fewer number of times a day?
Yes, we can.
Does Northwestern have any intention of changing it from 3 times a day?
No, we do not.
What factors would you consider before changing it from 3 times a day?
Can you please elaborate?
What would Northwestern No, I don't think I need to ask this question, actually. I think we're set. Thank you, Mr. Thurman.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to ask a couple of questions that have occurred to me because of other commissioners' questions.
That would be fine, Commissioner
you.
O'Donnell. And Commissioner Bukacek, your light is on. Thank you.
So you mentioned in reference to net metering is that a few people were inquiring about the ability of that they would have of that would go from AMI meters. But you've also said that 2,500 people have opted out at this point. Do you have any sort of an estimation if this we're talking about an opt-out provision? If there was an opt-in provision, given the company's statement that it is working to enhance the customer experience, if it was an opt-in, how many people do you think would have opted in to this program voluntarily?
I don't know if I would speculate on that. I mean, a lot of the customers that I don't know if they're going to reach out to you to say, I want the needs of it until you explain the benefits of the meter. So I would not speculate on that.
But just in terms of the figures that you gave, it would seem to me that it would be relatively few. So the conclusion
But
that
just because they didn't, I'm sorry for interrupting. I apologize.
the conclusion that I'm drawing from that is that this is not the purpose of this is to enhance the company's experience, not the customer's experience. That's the main driving factor for this whole thing.
That I would not agree with it because it's not a good customer experience to have your meter fail or have not receive reliable service.
Let me follow up on that and just say, what is the cost of an AMI meter?
I will defer that to the direct testimony of Matt Holden.
Okay, I'll ask that. The question that I'll ask to give him a heads up is I would like to know the difference between the cost of an AMI meter, an AMR meter, and an analog meter. Thank you. Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other follow-up questions from commissioners? I have one that also surfaced. This has been very enlightening. There was one thing I don't recall seeing in your testimony or any of the testimony. Maybe I missed it. If I did, could you please explain to me, were the costs of disposal of the meters discussed anywhere? Have you done an assessment on what the cost is to dispose of the AMRs?
I will defer that to the testimony of Matt Holden, being the project manager of that for AMI, our project. So
your testimony dealt with the costs of reading meters and installing meters. Is that correct? Or just reading meters?
can you state that again, please?
Your testimony, your knowledge, I mean, you're the program manager and it says that you're responsible for contractual agreements. I assume that you would have a handle on costs of the project. And so disposal must be one of the costs of the project, but you're not familiar with any of the disposal costs?
Not intimately related to those costs for knowing them. No, but I would defer that to Matt Holden. He's the project manager of that does a lot of that type of work.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That was my only follow-up. So seeing no other follow-up questions, would the Montana Consumer Council care to recross?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Thurman, I think you already answered this, but just so the record is clear, does Northwestern replace all AMR meters after 20 years?
I think our intent would be to replace them before they fail.
I'm just asking you, in practice, is it the practice to replace them after their 20-year anticipated useful life, all of them?
I'd say our answer would be to replace meters before they fail. Now, maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. I apologize. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty straightforward question. Just are there AMR meters in service today that have been in service for more than 20 years?
My previous answer was yes, there are.
Okay, so then the answer would be no, Northwestern does not replace all of the AMR meters after 20 years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And are you aware of any other examples of utility assets that are kept in service beyond their anticipated useful life?
I cannot speak to that.
So you don't know whether power plants are ever kept in service beyond their anticipated useful life?
That would be outside the scope of my testimony. I could not speak to that.
I mean, your testimony seemed focused on making sure that assets don't fail and that service is safe and reliable, but you're not aware of any other utility assets kept in service beyond their anticipated useful life?
Objection asked and answered.
But Madam Chair, I've asked the question. I don't believe it's been answered.
I agree, and I would rule the objection.
Can you state that again, please?
Are you aware of any examples of utility assets that are kept in service beyond their anticipated useful life?
No, I am not.
And then, the chair asked you why customers cannot keep their existing meters. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And one of the reasons you gave was that the existing AMR meters somehow interfere with the RF mesh. Is that correct?
They could cause, if there was a concentration of them in an area we're deploying and geographical location to that, what I call a router that communicates back to our facility. Yes, that could be the case.
And is that reason for Northwestern's position contained in your testimony anywhere in the record?
No, it is not.
So today is the first time the commission's heard that concern.
To my knowledge, yes.
And so just so I understand kind of the reality on the ground, would the AMR meters for opt-out customers be using the same mesh as the new AMI meters they'd be sharing?
No, they would not be part of a mesh network.
So can you maybe go in a little more detail about how the AMR meters would interfere? You said
Because they would be meters that would be not part of that mesh. That mesh, if you had a concentration of them, would not form or be ill-formed, and you would have a lack of communication amongst your AMI endpoints. So they would not be part of the RF mesh, but if there was enough density of them in a geographic location, could have an impact on our abilities to read AMI meters. Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Would Northwestern care to conduct redirect examination?
Yes, Madam Chair, we would. Thank you.
Can I grab my water? Thank you, Bobby.
Okay, so I'd like to back up a little bit and make sure we're all on the same page about why we're here and, you know, why Northwestern made the decisions it did. Why did Northwestern, when it was examining its end of life issue, choose advanced metering devices rather than replacing its AMR meters with more AMR meters?
We had the unique opportunity to take on enhancing our customer experience. moving our metering infrastructure to utility standards of today, being AMI, as you see, many utilities have moved there, as well as accepting or enhancing the digital transformation of the utility sector, where AMR does not support that, or does that lead to that transformation or those enhanced customer benefits?
Would Northwestern be in the process of replacing its AMR meters even if it had not decided to upgrade the system?
Yes, we would be.
So can you help us understand why Northwestern isn't replacing meters on an age basis? And we've talked a lot about end of life, life expectancy. Why isn't Northwestern rolling out AMI in that mechanism or in that way?
Sure, because those endpoints that if you did it by age of the asset, it could, where they are geographically located. They could cause problems for our AMI deployment or the rollout of that technology. Lesson learned maybe from what we did South Dakota, where we just ran it by like a typical meter route, and not looking at a concentric deployment model, that you have communications, you do a lot of mitigation work trying to get this to work. So replacing assets by age of that asset does not work when you go to an AMI technology or implementing of it.
So I want to go back just briefly to Northwestern's decision to upgrade the metering infrastructure. Can you just give us a brief insight into the benefits of the AMI product?
From a customer perspective or overall? Okay.
From a customer perspective.
I give the examples, and these are frequent. This is in Montana that I'm speaking to here too. High temperature alarm is one. We've had 5, if not 6 to my knowledge in the recent months here that, the meters have reported a potential high temperature at the meter itself. We made the determination that we're going to roll a truck to go look at that, which we should. Safety is, very important to us. What we have found in all cases is that there was issues with inside the meter base or the wiring of the customer's home, not Northwestern Energy's assets. But we had situations where that temperature got up to like 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and we prevented potential damage on a customer's home by proactively responding to these type of alarms. Customers were, for the most part, some of them, maybe they're not happy they got an electrician bill for it, but you look at the big picture, it's a good story to tell what these can do for our customers. We've had it in South Dakota with AMI. We have out there with the city of Chamberlain, they have AMI for their water meters. We set up a process to, same thing, using alarms as I spoke to coming in near real time or events, that they responded to like a high flow threshold or potential leak. City went out. It was actually in the city of Chamberlain's library. They never go down in the basement or look at it. They went down there and their boiler had burst or the pipes on it had. And they came back when that saved us potentially tens of thousands of dollars in damage because of AMI technology and what it delivered for us.
Okay. So I'm just trying to decide which way to go next. Do you recall testifying yesterday that you believed that Northwestern's existing AMR meter may meet the definition of an advanced meter under the metering statute?
Yes, I do.
Have you had an opportunity to review 69-4-1001?
Yes, I have.
And has that review altered your opinion, or would you like to offer any clarification on that discussion yesterday?
I would like to offer clarification on that discussion. So when I went back and read through that too, and I think hopefully I helped explain this better. When I look at the definition as explained in there, being the using radio or internet or wireless technology and using two-way communication, I look at our meters that use wake up, that you drive by and that mobile unit sends a request to it, the meter responds and responds back to that request with very basic metering information. From being a technical person, I see that as being, two-way communication as defined. But when it comes to AMR, it's significantly different. There's much more robust data being passed back and forth. And there's also functionality in the meter happening through that communication, where AMR, that is not the case. So to your point, Madam Chairman, that AMR, you could send the command to disconnect or to connect the meter. That doesn't exist with AMR. So when I answered that way, I seen it from more of what could be defined from a technical perspective. Would that be two-way communications? But it is not as robust or the same information as our AMR or AMI meters.
I just want to make sure I didn't misunderstand what you said. Did you say that AMR has more robust communication or AMI has more?
AMI has much more robust. If I misstated, I apologize.
So we've talked both yesterday, you have talked both yesterday and today with commissioners about the retention of the AMI meter as a valid option for Northwestern customers. You recall that conversation?
Could you state that again, please?
Do you recall discussing with commissioners whether or not the retention of the AMR meter is a valid option?
Yes, I do.
Can you clarify why you believe that the long-term retention of an AMR meter does not serve the best interests of customers?
Yes, allowing an asset which might seem like a short-term win or sitting out there and still functioning that's going to run to failure is not the way to run our utility in providing reliable service. It leads to situations that are less than desirable when it comes to customer interactions, such as estimated bills when we have to true them up. And I don't think it's in our interest or the customer's interest to allow them to keep assets out there that are at or reaching the end of their life and that are going to fail at some point.
So given the testimony that you've already provided, that some of our AMR meters, some of Northwestern's AMR meters are either at or very close today to the end of their useful life, can you help the commission understand the need to move the AMI deployment forward?
Yeah. In the order to move the AMI deployment forward, like I spoke to, AMR meters sitting out there in geographical locations limits, the ability of that technology if it's in concentration or a dense concentration of those endpoints. That hinders the ability of AMI or providing the service value to customers that are looking to that from an AMI perspective. So it can make it prohibited from our deployment of AMI technology.
Okay. Can we just take a step back in the bigger picture about the mesh network? We've talked about it, and you talked about interference, and I think that we're having a little bit of a misunderstanding. Can you give us the bigger picture of what is the mesh network?
Yes. Excuse me. Can I get a drink? So our solution being an RF mesh, we do what's called like a field area network or a design of how this is going to be implemented. And we, working with our vendor, strategically identify where we're going to place routers out there. They're one of the things that allow us to talk to meters. And then we look at deploying meters in a concentric model. And a concentric, think of it as like, I'll call it a bullseye. You kind of got the CGR sitting here and you want to deploy inside out. So that mesh is well formed versus running like linear in one direction and you have bad communications, meters that don't talk. So look at it as like a spider web. We lay down, and then these meters come back to that centralized point, which allows them to talk to our facilities, be it our head-in system, we call it, where we can communicate, and it allows us to communicate back out to those meters.
So, Mr. Thurman, what are the risks to the mesh network if a material percentage of customers either opt out or are allowed to retain their AMR meters?
It has the potential where that technology in those areas where you might have a concentration of AMR meters, that we have limited communications with those AMI endpoints, that the mesh is not well formed, or we have inconsistent or less than desirable read rates, and we're not getting the benefits of AMI for those customers, and we're not able to provide information back to the customer. So it is impeding to what we want to do with AMI for our customers in the utility.
So if too many opt out or choose to they could infringe on their neighbor's ability to get the benefits of AMI?
That is correct. That potential is there, yes.
So yesterday, the commission asked you about replacement costs for meters, how much Northwestern charges. And I just want to make sure that we understand, if a customer's AMR meter today fails, how does the company respond?
They would replace that meter.
Is there a cost to the customer?
There is no charge to the customer.
If a customer's AMI meter today fails, what is the company's response?
We replace that with an AMI meter with no charge to the customer.
If in the future an opt-out customer, their non-communicating meter fails, how does the company respond?
We replace that meter with no charge to the customer.
For each of these three categories of meter, AMR, AMI, non-communicating, given the asset life of all three classes, which one is more likely to fail?
Can you state that again, please? Excuse me.
In Northwestern's network today, or maybe in 6 months when we actually have non-communicating meters out in the field, which of those meters is more likely to fail? AMR, AMI, non-communicating?
AMR.
Based on what?
Age of that asset.
What happens if,
Excuse me.
as we get towards end of life and what would Northwestern's response be if tens or hundreds or, Lord help us all, thousands of meters fail in a short amount of time?
Could you state that again, please? I'm sorry. My throat's. All right.
The question is, how would Northwestern respond to a substantial outage if a lot of meters, AMR meters, failed at once? Tens, hundreds, or hopefully not, but thousands in a short amount of time.
To address all of them, I would say not in a timely manner to meet customers' expectations. You look at that many meters trying to replace over the area or the distance of our service territory, it would take time to do that. And that would lead to, customer inquiries, probably maybe complaints to regulatory. It would not be a good customer interaction with the utility.
What are the risks of allowing a meter to fail in the field?
Potential loss of service depends on what happens at the meter. Also the potential of having an estimated bill using AMR technology in our CIS system, which is much different than AMI, which can be significantly different than the actual consumption. And with the weather patterns and changing conditions in Montana, that can change drastically. Oh, thank you.
Was that the end of your response to that one?
Yes.
My understanding of your testimony is that Northwestern does have some AMR meters in the field today that are at the end of asset life or very close or even potentially at that 20-year mark. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Is it fair to say then that Northwestern is bearing a small risk related to those meters?
I would say yes.
How is it utility best practice to allow a much larger percentage of those meters to be in the field to fail?
I would say that is not best practice of a utility to do that.
So I want to briefly go back to Commissioner Fielder this morning asked you about customer expectations, and Commissioner O'Donnell asked you about also the concept of opt-in. What indications does a utility like Northwestern get other than phone calls that customers are asking for enhanced experience?
Excuse me. Through customer surveys that we do with our customers, our reputational surveys, such as we use Flynn Wright for doing that, some of that, and we also participate in JD Power, where those questions are posed to our customers. They're not identifying us as utility, but it gives it back to us, and we get that data that these are enhanced or customer experience or benefits that customers are looking from us, or what they expect the utility to deliver today, that really we cannot meet, or we get challenged to meet it without AMI technology.
Okay. I'm getting towards the end, Madam Chair. For the remote disconnect issue that was raised, I think you said this, but I want to make sure that the record is crystal clear. Under what conditions or what rules govern Northwestern's disconnect of customers?
My understanding is we have to follow what's proposed in rules right there, that Northwestern Energy just cannot shut somebody off because they want to. The only exception I know that would be a benefit from is like if there was a structure fire. Typically today we'll get a call from like a 911 center to respond to shut that off, which does take time to drive and get there to shut those meters off. With AMI, in that case, yeah, we would shut that off remotely. But besides that, we still follow the rules with AMI. I'm sorry, with regulations with the PSE. And then we still use AMI at that point to turn off the meter. Very similar to rolling it, going out through the field person and then shutting that meter off.
So this is my last question for you. And I think it's an important one. In your opinion and experience, have you personally or the company ever misrepresented the purpose, the function, the plan of Northwestern related to its meter upgrade program or its existing meter infrastructure?
No, I have not.
That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The chair would note that we've had some substantial testimony from this witness regarding deploying AMI in South Dakota, both anecdotal and systemic. And Northwestern's response to MCC 044, the data request, discussed the scientific and technical specifications and capabilities of the AMI meters deployed in other jurisdictions. I would therefore like to take administrative notice of the response to MCC 044. Are there any objections?
No objection.
No objection because it's already in the record, Madam Chair.
MCC 044 is admitted. So there are no objections.
I'm sorry. No,
Thank
there
you.
are no objections.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Thurman. I temporarily excuse this witness.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And now we will take a recess. The time is 10:09. This will be a 10-minute recess. We will be back on the record at 10:19. We are now off the record. We are back on the record. The time is 10:21 a.m. And we will now resume the hearing. Northwestern Energy, do you wish to bring any witnesses forward for your case in chief?
Yes, Madam Chair. Northwestern calls Matthew Holden to the stand.
Mr. Holden, were you sworn in yesterday? Thank you.
Good morning. Do you please state and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Matthew Holden, Holden.
And can you please provide your employer and your title?
My employer is manager of central maintenance.
Do you have any corrections or updates for your testimony?
I do have a correction, and that is when we filed, I was the project manager for Northwestern Energy for our AMI project, and I'm now a manager of central maintenance. Okay, I can do that.
Thank you. At this time, Madam Chair, Northwestern tenders Mr. Holden for cross-examination. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't move his testimony. Bad. Is your testimony in front of you, Mr. Holden?
Yes, ma'am.
Northwestern moves Mr. Holden's testimony as Northwestern 3.
Without objection,
No objection.
Northwestern 3 is admitted for the record.
We now tender him for cross-examination.
Montana Consumer Council, the witness is yours.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions of this witness from the commission? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Holden, on page MJH6 of your, wait a minute, is this testimony? Pre-filed direct testimony instead of rebuttal. Okay. Line 12. You say customers typically request additional information regarding the meters, including how they work and perceived health or safety risks. What information do you give people when they talk about the health and safety risks?
When I email our customers back, Commissioner O'Donnell, what I provide them is information specifically from our vendor. So what I will do is look at the technical information provided from Itron, who is the vendor of the meter, and I will send them information, white paper studies that they have completed with another utility, and given them that information so that they can review whatever concerns they may have around their health with this meter. They have an opportunity to look at what studies have been done by the vendor and another utility. So that gives them a little bit of insight on what's available to them as far as information. It's not necessarily coming directly from Northwestern Energy. I'm not providing them my opinion on it. I'm giving them information that has been provided by the vendor.
So again, on that that same line right there, can you give any sort of an idea without talking about specific numbers? Of course, you don't have specific numbers about how often people express health and safety concerns. Say a few, a lot.
I would be able to relate it to the number of customers that have requested a voluntary bypass. In the customers that I've interacted with specifically, I would say about 50% of those customers have had health-related concerns around the new AMI technology.
And are you personally comfortable with answering the questions of people with health and safety risks by just referring them to the manufacturer of the system, and that is going to solve all of their issues? Are you the company is devoted to customer experience. So, I mean, and I respect that. The company does a great job on that regard. I really believe that. But in this case, it seems to be that by just referring people to what the company who provides it saying that is not a really comprehensive answer.
Understood. Commissioner O'Donnell, I am not a doctor. I am not an expert in this field, so I wouldn't feel justified providing them my opinion or my guidance on something that I really have no full understanding of what their health concerns are or what their issues may be around these meters. I can only provide them information that has been provided by both Itron and other utilities using this same Itron product. So it may not be, as you're stating, a best customer experience, but I don't feel like it would be in my best
Sure.
interest to also tell them my opinion.
Sure. The question that I asked the previous witness about the cost of an AMI meter, an AMR meter, or an analog meter, the question was deferred to you.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea what those costs are?
I have a very good idea what our AMI meters cost right now.
Okay.
I do know that I'll say non-communicating meters, we purchased 4 different variations of those non-communicating meters. And I would have to say it's been about a month since I've looked at the actual costs.
Mhm.
But I will say this. The AMI meters that we're purchasing from Itron, the cost of the non-communicating meter is higher for the same type of meter. And we're looking at form and class than that of the AMI meter. And what I'm told from the vendor is that the reason for this cost increase for non-communicating meters is it's a technology that's not really being used that often. Most utilities are migrating to, as Mr. Thurman stated, to an AMI technology. So purchasing meters in other capacities, non-communicating, it's more expensive because they're not as widely available.
Good. That makes perfect sense. What about compared to an AMR meter?
AMR meters, I'll be honest, I do not know the specific costs again, but I do believe based on what I've seen from AMR meters that have been purchased in the past, cost comparisons, AMI meters are in line with that cost of an AMR meter.
So there's been a lot of discussion about end of life for AMR meters. If something, and it's already been stated that about 50% of them perhaps have already reached their end of factory certified life. Okay, and they're still functioning okay. Okay, but if before there's a replacement, if that meter is taken out, is it repaired? Is it thrown away and a new one put in? Is there any refurbishment of AMR meters?
For the process of replacement of an AMR meter, we do not have them refurbished. The cost is pretty significant if we were to send these in and have them rebuilt. It is an asset that we recycle, and we replace it with a new one.
Okay. So it's also been stated that the statute calls for the option of somebody retaining their meter. It seems to be from the previous witnesses saying, well, yeah, they have that right, but we're not going to honor it because we can't guarantee that meter is going to last any particular time. That makes sense. In terms, in light of like as a rationalization, that defies the actual statute that says that they're able to retain their meter. There seems to be a conflict right there between the attitude of the company to comply and the statute itself. Could you address that?
So if I can clarify your question, Mr.
Sure.
O'Donnell, you're stating that Northwestern Energy is taking it upon itself to not allow a customer to keep its AMR meter and forcing them to take something different and non-communicating meter.
Yes.
Okay. And if you're saying, do I agree with that? Do I agree with that language of how we're interpreting it? Or are you saying that we are not following the letter of what that law is stating?
Well, thank you for asking for clarification. It seems like there's a dissonance right there. Do you feel uneasy about the fact that the law says that they can retain their meter, and the company is saying, well, for technological reasons, we can't comply? But the interpretation is to retain their meter is that this particular piece of metal is mine, and I'm going to keep this one. Instead of saying that to a customer, if you have an AMR, you can keep an AMR. It seems to me the more logical sense is that if they have an AMR, they can keep an AMR. A replacement AMR, they can stay at the AMR level of operation into the future until they change their mind. It's not related to that particular piece of equipment, but that style of equipment. Your opinion, please.
Commissioner O'Donnell, I understood. So the retention of an AMR meter was really a stopgap for us as we worked through the voluntary bypass program. Our interpretation of what we went through, I would say my interpretation of what we went through is that an AMR meter is providing a two-way communication. Now, as Mr. Thurman suggested or noted, it's a very different, I will say, complexity or scale of two-way, but it still meets the definition of two-way. And what we're trying to do is follow the law stating that if we're not going to offer a customer a two-way meter, which in this instance is an AMR meter, we would offer them a non-communicating meter.
Well, it seems to me the statute does not say that you can't have a communicating meter. What it says is, as I read it, and I'm not an attorney, okay, but what I read it, it says that the company must offer at least one alternative that is a non-communicating meter, one alternative, but it's not limited to that, and that the statute would not preclude somebody, in fact, specifically allows somebody to retain their AMR meter, which, as you say, is a communicating meter. So it seems to me that there is a difference of definition within that, or the way the company takes it, that simply cannot stand. They're contradictory statements.
I would not agree that we can't stand that. I would agree that Northwestern Energy is taking the proactive approach by stating that we're moving our technology to a AMI technology industry standard, as Mr. Thurman's expressed.
In spite of the statute. Okay. All right.
Not in spite of the statute. I don't agree with that. I believe that we are following what's expected of us based on the language that's out there.
Based upon the company's interpretation. I get that. Okay. On page 7 of your testimony, line 5, I expect even fewer customers will ultimately transition from the voluntary bypass to the formal opt-out program. That be because, according to the company's proposal to do the formal opt-out program, it will cost them money?
That is not the intent of that statement, but Commissioner, no. The intent,
But is that the reflection of what you see as fact?
No, sir. No, sir. What I'm representing here is after we have an opportunity to speak with customers and educate them on the benefits of what AMI provides compared to that of AMR, we're going to see less people opt out than we would if we didn't have that opportunity to provide that information to them.
Thank you. I think that's disingenuous, if I understand the use of the word correctly.
Objection. I'm sorry, sir.
What?
Objection is sustained. Commissioner O'Donnell, this portion is for questioning witnesses, not arguing with witnesses. So please ask your questions.
My question was whether or not the cost of entering the formal opt-out period would be a disincentive for people participating in the program. That was a question. It was only a question, in the form of a question.
So that if I can clarify your question,
Sure.
Commissioner, you're stating that line 4 and 5 within my testimony, those who ultimately choose the voluntary bypass, but based, keeping metrics on number of customers who call questions versus those who ultimately choose the voluntary bypass. Based on my experience, I estimate about half of the people I talk to have chosen the bypass. So are you asking me the question that we feel we're trying to incentivize people to take AMI because of costs associated with opt-out?
It would seem to me, and I'm asking for your agreement or disagreement based upon the fact you've spoken with people, okay, on this, that when it comes time to pay $75 or $150 or something of that nature, or $15 a month or $5 a month, that people might be inclined to say, you know, hey, I can't afford that, so I'll go along with it. That would be a disincentive. Being that you've talked to people about incentives, do you feel that that is unreasonable?
I disagree that it would disincentive individuals who want to opt out. The customers that I have spoken with are adamant, despite any cost, that they will opt out because they don't want the AMI technology.
Okay, thank you for that answer. On your testimony on page 8, line 6, will these voluntary bypass customers be assessed any costs if they elect to opt out? Okay, since it's stated by a previous witness that all of the meters are going to be replaced, okay, that has already been decided. So why would there be an additional cost for replacing an existing AMR meter with another AMR meter as opposed to an AMI meter? The installation costs are the same. Every meter is going to be changed out. So what difference would it make from the installation costs, which meter it is?
To clarify your question, are you asking AMR replacement of another AMR meter?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
For voluntary bypass customers, again, this is a stopgap, allowing them to retain their existing meter while we work through the rules of the tariff, the proposed opt-out tariff. The option of purchasing a new AMI meter is currently not available based on what we're offering.
I was only talking about the installation costs, not the cost of the meter. The cost of somebody going out there. What I'm questioning is the cost of $75 for an installation cost for somebody who is requesting a different type of meter than an AMI meter. What I'm saying is, if the installation costs are exactly the same, why charge that $75?
Northwestern Energy believes that this is a portion of the actual cost of what was in Mr. Thurman's testimony, and would be assessed to those small number of individuals, number of customers who are requesting non-AMI. Again, you're asking, why would we charge that to that customer if they're going to have a meter replaced anyway? I would defer that to the testimony of Mrs. Fang.
Thank you. I'm through with my question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further questions from commissioners? Commissioner Bukacek.
So sounds like with your conversation with Commissioner O'Donnell, I believe you said that non-communicating meters, the analog meters, they can keep that, or they can even request that. Is that correct? similar to the bypass and in compliance with the administrative rule. Did you say that?
No, ma'am, not to my knowledge. Commissioner Bukacek, I believe what I stated, and hopefully I can clarify this, is that we are purchasing new non-communicating digital meters for replacement of our assets currently that are on our system. We do not offer a non-ERDID, non-communicating. We don't have those in our possession at this time. As far as existing ones, we had to go out and purchase new to get a non-communicating meter.
So it'll be digital, non-communicating. Okay. And do you know how many hertz that puts out?
I do not know.
Another question? And this would be administrative rule, the same one, but this is section 2B. Do you have that in front of you? Administrative rule 38.5.2603.
You can give me just a minute. I think I have a copy for the witness.
Excuse me, section 3, part B.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, if depending on how many questions you have about this, Commissioner Bukacek, maybe we want to take just 2 minutes and make photocopies of the rules so everybody's looking at it. Would that be useful, or?
We'll take a 5-minute recess to accommodate this request. So we are now off the record. It is 10:43. We will come back in 5 minutes.
Okay, so that is, okay.
We will now be back on the record. The time is 10:50 a.m. and we will continue with the questioning. Commissioner Bukacek.
So, Mr. Holden, you have before you Administrative Rule 38.5.2603. And under 2B, it says the utility shall explain each option for people that want to opt out and the allowable charges. So would you explain to the customer AMR versus digital non-communicating? Those two options would be explained to the customer. Is that correct?
And I apologize, Commissioner, to clarify, is 3B?
Yes. 3B, thank you.
And again, the statement within this is utilities shall explain the facts concerning advanced meters and attempt to address any customer concerns. Are we, again, I'm just asking for clarification, AMI versus non-communicating or AMR versus non-communicating? What we're providing as a non-communicating?
When it's explaining each option, it seems that would be AMI, AMR, or the digital non-communicating option, but people that were opting out would be opting for the AMR or the digital non-communicating option. So would they be given those options?
At this time, within my testimony, we are covering the options of an advanced and AMI meter or a non-communicating meter. I will say, I have not looked at any plans to provide our customers information on the current AMR meter that they have in front of them, have the AMR meter that they have at their premise.
But that would go back to section 1 of the same administrative rule that says that they can retain their existing meter. So based on the rule, it seems that would be an option.
Apologize, I'm reading
It's
through this.
three sentences down. They can decline installation. It says shall provide customers the option to decline installation of advanced metering device and retain existing meter.
Correct, Commissioner. But based upon previous testimony and our conversations throughout, Northwestern Energy's interpretation of an AMR meter is that advanced meter, which is what we're replacing with a new AMI meter. And so the options would be currently AMI meter or non-communicating, which are the options we would explain to our customer, the difference between the two. So I understand what your question is. I would say I have not looked at it in the sense that maintaining their meter as currently an option, because I'm reading of that as an advanced meter. The AMR meter is an advanced meter. So I understand your question, Commissioner, but no, we have not provided that information.
Okay. Do you agree that I'm asking to retain their existing meter if it was an AMR, that would be in compliance with section 1? To retain the existing meter?
Apologize, I'm reading, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, at this point, to the extent this calls for a legal conclusion, maybe it's more appropriate for legal briefing after the hearing. So I guess we would softly object on the basis it calls for a legal conclusion.
The objection sustained. Commissioner Bukacek, do you have any other questions? Commissioner Pinocci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it looks like I'm seeing some testimony where you have discussions with customers about safety concerns from time to time and go over what concerns they may have. Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner.
I have some information here. A ratepayer sent me this email and I'll read what it says here. New Mexico and Connecticut have rejected smart meters due to the overwhelming evidence of harm. Has anyone ever asked you about that?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, we're going to object to information outside of the record or being proffered by applicant.
Does MCC have a response to the objection?
Not to the information that's being referenced, but the question of what other states are doing, that seems relevant given the other comparisons to other states in the record already.
And maybe if I could clarify our objection, it's hearsay. It's that we can't cross-examine a ratepayer email.
That objection is sustained. Commissioner Pinochi, can you simply refer to his testimony and continue your questioning on his testimony? We're on the topic of safety in general.
So as a commissioner, safe, reliable, and affordable seems to be our goals. So if someone was to ask you the question, if another state has outlawed it during a period due to safety concerns, how would you reply to them if they asked you that question?
I would say that we're not, we don't reference other states, what they're doing with their, as far as safety protocols. Our focus right now is what the technology we're providing, meeting the specific guidelines by FCC, safety concerns around that. That's what we focused on, and it met those requirements. If a customer were to come to me and ask me about other states and their practice around, say, opting out or declining AMI because of safety related, I wouldn't be able to respond to them, would not be able to give them an answer.
Have you ever received a call where someone has asked you this question about another state saying safety is a concern, so we're not going to allow them? Has that question ever happened?
Be honest, Commissioner, I don't recall.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about affordable. I was in a meeting where we were discussing water meters and the cost savings of putting in a water meter that didn't have to be read. And the cost was more. So the savings is they don't have to physically read the meter. They could just drive by with the truck. The concern came up, well, what if somebody said, we don't want the meter? Well, fine, we don't give it to them. We'll just change it as we have to, as they wear out or the upgrade. But those that'll take it will go ahead and install it. There's no talk of saying we're going to charge somebody to keep the old meter, because that's the deal we have with them now. We read the meter, we send them the bill. So a concern with the ratepayer that comes to me is, and I'm looking at your testimony here on where you come up with charges, you know, a one-time fee of $75, or we're going to charge more. I've asked this question earlier, but I'm going to ask you. We've already made an agreement to charge them for the current meter they have. It's not fair to say, if you're going to keep that, we're going to charge you more. It seems to be more fair if you're going to put in this new meter where we can turn the power on and off without sending a guy out. We can read the meter without sending somebody out. We should give you a break in your price, not charge you more. Has anyone asked you that question and asked why?
Sure, no one's asked me anything associated with costs. The intent of, the information I have here within my testimony on page MJH 8, the costs that were proposed for opt-out would be deferred to Mrs. Fang within her testimony. But again, the question as far as a customer break currently within the Northwestern Energy system, our metering system, we use one technology. It's AMR. We're moving toward an advanced metering infrastructure project where some customers wish not to choose that. That is being provided as an option, a non-communicating meter, but we're asking them to pay for a small portion of these additional costs that are incurred to get the meter changed out and to cover the cost of reading that meter.
No more questions. Thank you.
Further questions? Brown, no? Okay. Well, Commissioner,
If you would.
is it on that line of questioning?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So you indicated response to Commissioner Pinochi that none of the callers have talked about cost. And I find that to be surprising is that as a commissioner, and I imagine we all get the same ones, we are deluged with people calling concerned about they not only say basically, hell no, we don't want the meter, but in any case, hell no, we're not going to pay for it. Cost is a very big issue that we see. I find it surprising you say that no one has discussed that with you.
To be honest, Commissioner, I have not had any correspondence with a customer related to costs. The conversations I've had with customers are typically related around how does the technology work and any sort of concerns around the health risks that they see with this technology, nothing around cost.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it's my turn. So, Mr. Holden, there was a lingering question I had asked the last witness regarding the cost of disposal of the meters. Do you have information about that?
Madam Chair, I have an understanding of the cost, but I don't have the specific costs associated with recycling the meters that we're taking from the field.
Can you describe to us your understanding of costs associated with disposing of or recycling an old meter?
Absolutely. Currently, the process is within this deployment that we're undertaking. Our vendor, TrueCheck, is replacing the meters in the field. The meters that they pull from the customer's premise, they put them in a box. They're brought back to their facility and sent then to Northwestern Energy, where they're separated so that we'll say plastic cover meters are put into one bin. Those with glass or anything, a lot of our old mechanical style analog type meters are put into another. They're sent to a recycling facility. And I apologize, but I believe the company's name is Interco, and they are handling the recycling for Northwestern Energy.
Is there a cost to
Yes, ma'am.
Northwestern for that process?
Yes, ma'am.
And if a AMR meter was left on a customer's home or business, there would not be that additional cost related to that meter, correct?
That is correct.
Is there any return? Is there any salvage value to the disposed or cast off meters?
Madam Chair, no, there's not.
Okay.
This is all cost incurred for recycling.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to ask you a little bit about the non-communicating digital meters. What type of capabilities do they have? Are they adaptable to become AMIs, or are they strictly non-communicating forever?
The meters that we are looking to purchase, or actually I take that back, that we have purchased are set as non-communicating only. We would have to, and being honest, we would have to send them back to be retrofit, to be ERDed. And it would in essence be somewhat of like an AMR technology, but the cost to do that would far outweigh just purchasing a brand new meter.
Okay.
So these are built and designed specifically to be, in essence, our non-communicating meter.
Has Northwestern deployed any of those yet?
No, ma'am.
Perhaps I should have asked this to the last witness, but I'll try you just because the question comes to mind now. Can the AMR meters be made so that they are non-communicating as well?
I believe they could, but I'm going to clarify. Again, it would be removing the meter from the premise, sending it back to the manufacturer. They would have to remove the ERT, from that meter and send it back to us to use as a non-communicating meter. Again, the cost time associated with this retrofit wouldn't justify the cost of just purchasing a new non-communicating.
Mhm. Are you certain that can't be done in the field? There can't be, the ERT can't be removed in the field?
Yes, ma'am.
The mailer that Northwestern's, the informational mailer that Northwestern has sent out to customers, you've attached, I think, 2 versions of that in your testimony. Is that correct? Or is that all one version?
Based on what I'm looking at, Madam Chair, this is one version. What this reflects is the brochure that we send out to our customers. This is a blown up version of the postcard that we're mailing to our customers.
Okay, so we have the brochure and the postcard in your testimony.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Are these the latest versions of these pieces of mail?
Yes, Madam Chair, they are.
Were there prior versions
Yes, Madam Chair, there
that
were.
were sent to customers?
Yes.
Is there a difference between those versions and these versions here?
There are differences. Yes.
What are those differences?
Based on what I recall, the information will reference the brochure here, bottom right-hand side of the language regarding what if I don't want an upgraded meter. That's what we began sending customers as our proactive attempt to let our customers know that there was a voluntary bypass option available while we worked through the opt-out.
And the difference between the first mailer that was sent out and I believe you made some corrections to the first mailer and then sent out a second mailer to the same group of customers. Is that correct?
To my recollection, yes, but I don't recall the actual changes to the language in it.
Do you remember why it was changed?
I don't. Sorry, Madam Chair, I don't.
Okay. Were you involved at all in the review of the legislation that was working through as House Bill 606 in the 2021 session? Okay.
No, ma'am.
How about
Chair.
the rulemaking as the commission promulgated the rulemaking?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I noticed that in your testimony, you refer to whether determination of whether or not a customer would be eligible for the opt-out program. What is the origin of this idea that Northwestern has the authority to determine whether or not somebody is eligible to opt out when the law states that there should be this opt-out program?
The eligibility around a customer able to opt out focuses on them being a customer that has within the last 24 months, I believe it's in the testimony of Mr. Thurmond, within 24 months, no acts of violence or threats toward the company.
Well, I've read the testimony on what Northwestern considers to be eligibility criteria, but my question is, where does Northwestern find the authority to determine whether a customer is eligible or not? Do you know where that came from?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, we would insert here, it also calls for a legal conclusion that might be better served by briefing. he can try to answer, but
And I would answer you that I'm not aware. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yes, I'm just asking if you know where the idea that Northwestern could have a program that determines whether or not a customer is eligible to opt out. Do you know where that idea came from?
I do not know, ma'am.
So you weren't part of determining eligibility for customers.
No, ma'am, I was not.
Do you know who was?
Don't.
Okay.
I don't. I was aware of what was set forth based on previous discussions by other individuals.
Okay. Thank you. That is all the questions I have for this witness. Now we will move on to Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few. In your testimony, you noted that the current rate of bypass under Northwestern's voluntary bypass option is very low. Do you recall that testimony?
Can you tell me what page you're looking
I
at?
believe it's page 5 of your testimony, lines 1 through 5.
Yes, sir.
Has Northwestern established a threshold? Sorry, let me back up a step here. It's important to Northwestern to keep the AMI opt-out low in order to achieve that mesh that the AMI offers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Has Northwestern identified the threshold at which too many opt-outs would impair that mesh?
We have not identified a threshold. What we have looked at is a percentage based on when we started this. That range, we identified approximately 1% of customers we felt like would not want the AMI technology. A caveat that with, it depends on the specific area, geographic location on where those customers would opt out, because it could absolutely affect the mesh. But from a opt-out threshold, no, we've never identified the most we could accept from an opt-out.
I understand. Okay. So in a particularly dispersed area, even a relatively low percentage of opt-outs could impair the capability of that mesh.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
If you had too many opt-outs within an area that is dispersed like that, what would happen to the mesh? Could you describe for me what specifically you would see in terms of your meter reading capability?
We would start seeing best way to say it is the reliability or the percentage of communication rate that we see from that meter would be significantly low. As Mr. Thurman testified with what we've done in South Dakota, this is what happened is as the meter distances started growing, the availability for them to communicate reliably to each other went way down. So we would start seeing issues with communication rates, potentially estimating bills, and we would have to redesign, restructure what that solution looked like for that area based on the number of customers that did opt out. That did opt out, yes, ma'am.
What sort of solution would Northwestern use in that circumstance?
I would not be able to say at this time. We would have to evaluate what we see in the field.
If the system fell apart to a point where you could not obtain adequate communication between the AMI meters, is it possible to run a truck similar to an AMR meter to read those meters in a remote area?
No, sir. They would have to be manually read. They do not communicate via AMR. It's in essence, it's an AMI only solution. And so if those are not communicating via AMI, we have to manually read.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. The second line that I'd like to explore here is the non-communicating digital meter. The non-communicating digital meter, describe for me what aspect of that is digital.
The display. The display is an LCD screen.
Right. So is it fair to say that the only difference between the digital non-communicating meter and what maybe folks would think of as an analog meter is the LCD display.
Just say that
Yeah.
question again. I'm sorry.
The differences between what people would maybe think of as an analog meter, one that has a dial, and Northwestern's proposed digital non-communicating meter. The only difference is that LCD display.
Between an analog and digital,
And digital non-communicating meters.
digital analog, non-communicating.
Yes.
Yes, is the difference would be the display. Also components within inside that are going to be different. Our analog meters are typically an old electromechanical type meter, a lot of gearing. They have the disc that revolves within it. And that's where another area where we see, because of that being aging meter types, they start to slow. And so we're not, we're taking those off of our system and replacing them with a digital LCD screen meter.
Okay. Between the digital LCD screen and those innards that change in your proposed meter here, does the proposed meter still leak radio frequency?
I would not be able to answer that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Would Montana Consumer Council like to recross?
No, thank you.
Okay. I temporarily excuse this witness. Oh, wait, excuse me, I'm sorry. Northwestern Energy, would you like to redirect?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few here. Okay. Mr. Holden, how many AMI meters have been installed in Montana approximately?
We have installed approximately 200,000 endpoints in Montana, electric meters and gas ERTs combined.
And can you refresh us on how many of those folks have entered a voluntary bypass?
For the areas that we've deployed, we have seen approximately 2,300 voluntary bypasses, which would equate to approximately 1% of the deployment areas.
Has Northwestern received bypass requests from customers outside of our deployment area?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Holden, what are the challenges to the utility in having multiple meters to maintain?
It becomes extremely difficult maintaining a variation of technologies and supporting those within both in the field and back office. They may require different solutions to read the meter. They may require different solutions to bring that billing information in. It can be difficult to continue purchasing a technology that is no longer really used in certain areas. So we find it at times difficult to secure those metering types because they're no longer offered.
Does it create challenges to the utility to maintain a variety of meter types?
Yes, it does.
I want to revisit an issue that you were discussing with Commissioner Bukacek. I think I heard you say you were talking that y'all were discussing the education of customers and different choices. If the commission requires Northwestern to have AMR as an opt-out solution in some form or fashion, will Northwestern educate the customer?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Fielder asked you about recycling costs and would it save costs to leave an AMR meter on a house? If and when that meter fails, that cost would be incurred, correct?
Correct.
Does it refresh your recollection that perhaps the brochure information, the opt-out / bypass information was updated following the commission's?
It was, yes, ma'am.
Last question. Mr. Holden, you were just discussing with Mr. Hamilton, what happens in the case of a mesh failure. Is one of the potential harms a missed alarm by an AMI if the mesh is failing?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And what kind of a risk does that pose, or how concerned are you about that risk?
It is a potential risk that we would identify. The reason that we've established alarms and events and so that we can proactively address any concerns, questions from customers, or potential issues such as structure fires. If we're unable to get those, we're going to be unable to respond to those customers in a timely fashion. So it poses a pretty big risk.
Thank you. That's all, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Now I temporarily excuse this witness.
Madam Chair.
May I ask him one question?
I don't think that would be permitted at this point, Commissioner.
As long as we get a chance to redirect if necessary. Western doesn't object.
Okay, go ahead.
So back to the old fashioned mechanical meter, which was a rotating aluminum disc around two conductors. The current one does, the one that has the digital read, that it does not have that. So the innards, what is it? I don't need to know the mechanics of how it works, but I'd like to know how many hertz. For instance, the old fashioned meter was 60 hertz. The current smart meters are 900 megahertz to 2400. So in terms of safety issues and that kind of thing, I'm just wondering, do you know what the hertz, megahertz are?
For the non-communicating meters?
Correct.
Commissioner, I do not know that. I do not know that.
Okay.
We don't have any redirect.
Okay, with no objections, the witness is now temporarily excused. Thank you. Okay, are everybody okay with moving to the next witness at this point? We may not finish before lunch, but we'll go for a little while and plan on taking lunch at noon. We may have to come back after lunch for a short while. All right, Northwestern, do you have any further witnesses?
We do, Madam Chair. Northwestern calls Cynthia Fang to the stand.
Ms. Fang, you were sworn in yesterday, correct?
Correct.
Great. Ms. Fang, can you please state your name and spell your last for the record?
Cynthia Fang, Fang.
And can you please provide your employer and your title?
Northwestern Energy, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs.
And do you have your pre-filed testimony in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Can you please identify both sets for the record?
Northwestern Energy Exhibit NWE-4 and Exhibit NWE-5.
So NWE4 is your pre-filed direct testimony. NWE5 is your pre-filed rebuttal testimony.
Correct.
Northwestern would move those into the record at this time.
No objection.
Without objection, NWE 4 and 5 are admitted into the record.
Ms. Fang, do you have any updates or corrections to your testimony?
I do have an update. At the time of both testimonies, I was Director of Regulatory Affairs for Northwestern Energy. I have since changed roles and am Vice President of Northwestern Energy, of Regulatory Affairs, sorry.
Great. At this time, Northwestern would tender Ms. Fang for cross-examination.
Montana Consumer Council have questions for this witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Ms. Fang.
Good morning.
Did you hear Mr. Thurman testify yesterday that Northwestern, the company, will not benefit from the AMI rollout?
I am trying to recall his specific statements, and I believe his statement was that the focus was about customer experience rather than company benefits.
Okay, and so do you agree with that statement?
I do believe that the focus of AMI rollout is to enhance the customer experience.
Will the company also benefit from the rollout of AMI technology?
Much of the from the company's perspective, this does allow the company to stay current with what we see across the industry as far as service offerings. The opportunities that it avails for us to enhance that customer experience is definitely a company benefit.
Are smart meters, the cost of smart meters and the rollout of smart meters, are those costs rate-based?
So currently the recovery of smart meters, there was an earlier question about cost recovery of meters, meter reading. So our cost recovery comes from those costs are recovered through base rates that are determined in a rate case. So right now, what Northwestern is recovering is 2017 test year costs that were determined in a 2018 electric rate case. In between rate cases, there's no adjustment to base rates for any changes in costs. And so the question about recovery of smart meter costs is being addressed currently in our 2022 rate case.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess I'm not asking specifically about smart meters, but just meters in general. When Northwestern installs a meter, do any of the costs associated with that go into rate base?
If they are captured in the test year associated with the rate case, they are addressed at that time.
They are addressed at that time. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
So
How are they
between
addressed?
rate
Well,
case,
sorry, let me just restate the question. I think I could have stated it more clearly. Are some of the metering costs rate-based generally? Are metering costs rate-based? Or investments related to metering?
So when we come in for a rate case, those metering costs would be included in the presentation of rate base to be approved for an authorized rate base to be approved by the commission.
Okay, so that was a yes, right?
Yes, with clarification. Yes.
And I'm just trying to understand the clarification. Is there anything, am I missing something? It sounds like the answer is yes, metering costs go into rate base. Is there something I'm missing there?
Metering costs will go into rate base at the time of a rate case,
Right.
but metering costs that are incurred in between rate cases, there's no adjustment for cost recovery. So
Sure.
the company then has to absorb those costs through recovery of existing base rates.
Fair enough. And if there are efficiencies achieved between rate cases, are those efficiencies or savings passed through to customers in base rates?
Those efficiencies are often used to offset increases in costs in between rate cases.
So was that a no?
Base rates are fixed between rate cases, so there's no adjustment either way.
Great. And Northwestern earns a return on rate base, right?
Correct.
And if Northwestern ends up installing some of these new digital non-communicating meters, would some of the cost of those also go into rate base, presumably?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Questions from the commission? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. Ms. Feng, on your, again, direct testimony on CSF 2, the very last line, you say Northwestern's new standard meter and receives service through an alternative non-communicating meter. Again, you have a different perspective being a attorney with the company. In the 38.52603, that seems to be contradictory. the statements of other witnesses that people cannot retain their AMR meter because they can't be replaced. It's be disruptive to the mesh, their end of life for all sorts of reasons. But the statute calls for being able to retain the existing meter. But the company is basically saying, no, that's not possible, and we won't allow that to happen.
Commissioner O'Donnell, do you mind if I do a quick clarification before I respond?
Please.
I am not an attorney for Northwestern. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Well, I meant an attorney employed by Northwestern.
I am not an attorney.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me. Excuse me. I was always under the impression that you were. Okay.
Oh, no.
Maybe it's because of your great wisdom that I'm thinking that. That's not a derogatory
Oh, okay,
statement.
let's,
Anyway,
the witness.
so there
consent
seems to be
response.
a conflict between that statement by the company that you have to get a non-communicating meter, as opposed to the statute that calls for being able to retain the existing meter. It seems like the previous witnesses have said, no, that's not possible. We're not going to, it's disruptive. We're not going to replace an existing AMR meter, which is nearing end of life, with one that is brand new, for instance. Seems to be a conflict. Can you address that?
Madam Chair, I would just again offer a very soft objection that this is a legal matter that probably is better for briefing.
Well, I was going based upon through and receive service through an alternating non-communicant. So it's the specificity of that statement that the only choice that a customer has is only getting an a non-communicating meter. It seems to be in conflict with what the law says. It seems to me.
I'd like the witness to respond to that.
So as I stated earlier, I am not an attorney.
Okay.
But based on my understanding, first and foremost, to be clear, if the commission determines that Northwestern should retain the ability, allow customers to have the ability to retain their AMR, Northwestern will absolutely comply. The proposal that Northwestern put forward in this proceeding is a proposal to have 2 meter offerings for our customers. And regarding the question of why did we not include the retention of the AMR as an option in our proposal, is because of the concern about whether or not the AMR would meet the requirements because of the two-way communication, which has been an active discussion the last 2 days. So it certainly is not Northwestern's intention to not comply with statute. That was the reason for the structure of our proposal, and we will absolutely comply with the commission's determination on that issue.
Well, thank you. And that's entirely reasonable. Okay. It just seemed like the testimony before seemed to preclude that. And it's saying that, no, they're either going to get an AMI or a non-communicating meter, period. So I'm glad you clarified that.
And one more clarification, if you don't mind, it's the prior witness were speaking specifically to our proposal as presented. I'm just adding the additional clarification that we will absolutely comply with the commission's determination.
And I appreciate that. I really do. On page 4 of your testimony, line 3, one-time exchange costs for opt-out, which includes the costs for a non-communicating digital meter and the cost of its installation. So being that the previous witnesses have testified for the company that every meter is going to be replaced, why would just the customers opting out be charged installation costs?
So when you think about Northwestern's deployment of AMI, we're effectively changing what the new standard of service is for our customers. So moving away from AMR meters to AMI, that will become our new standard offering of service. And when you think about what it means to offer optionality on top of that sort of standard of service. So you heard Mr. Holden talk about the fact that right now our standard of service is AMR. That's what all of our customers have. So we're making that transition. The offer of optionality, it comes with costs. And so Mr. Holden had talked to some of what some of those costs would look like. And when we think about how we should address those costs, we looked at both customer groups, right? It's the question about participating customers in opt-out. What costs should they bear? And if they don't bear those costs, then that means the non-participating customers would bear those costs. So when we put together our proposal for what to charge for opt-out, that's why we sought to find a balance between the interests of both groups of customers.
I'm still not clear on that. If when the company says that all meters are going to be replaced, then one way of looking at it is to say that we have 385,000 customers, and every one of them is going to incur installation costs of X amount. So whether or not they get a non-communicating meter or an AMI meter, the installation cost is going to be the same. It's not an additional cost. It's one that the company has said, everybody is going to have to pay this. So why is it an additional cost?
The additional cost would be from the additional purchase of those distinct meters.
I was just talking about installation.
And regarding installation, so if you think about how we've planned deployment, both Mr. Thurman and Mr. Holden, they talked about how there's a real structure to how we're deploying AMI technology. Our expectation is that opt-out doesn't follow that same deployment schedule. And because of that, it's a separate visit. And that's where we see it being an additional cost. And one thing I do want to note too is when we think about the one-time opt-out fee that we're proposing, it is a good bit below the full cost of what that service is. So we also took that into consideration as we were thinking about what should the ultimate pricing look like. We didn't just look at costs.
Okay, I guess perhaps I was under the misconception that a truck would go out and have 6 AMI meters and 2 non-communicating meters, and they would say, okay, this goes to this house, that goes to that house, but it's all going to be done on the same trip. What you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is that one driver would be going out there installing AMI meters, and another driver is going out putting non-communicating meters, which sounds to me be, I respect the company and their procedures, and I don't understand it. It seems odd to me why that would happen. I don't understand it, but I imagine that there are technical reasons for doing that. That clarifies.
Yeah, and our expectation of what the reason that it might look like that, why we would have to do 2 separate runs, is deployment of the AMI meters. You know, it's all scheduled, and so they're out doing that transition. The opt-out happens when a customer calls to ask for it. So it wouldn't, to be responsive to that, it wouldn't necessarily always fit with that other schedule. And this is outside of my scope, but I would guess that there might also be some difference as far as what that installation of the AMI might look like versus what the installation of the alternatives might look like. There might be some differences there as well. And so that's why our expectation is that there would need to be a separate installation associated with that.
Thank you. That really helps a lot, that explanation. On page 6 of your testimony, the last line on there, starting at line 18, Northwestern believes it is appropriate to charge customers to reflect the additional cost associated with maintaining this non-standard option. Again, that flies in the face of being able to retain their existing meter. But it seems to me that people would be paid for an additional cost if they're receiving an additional benefit. It's been stated that there are many customer benefits for having an AMI meter. So if somebody is opting out of that, opting for a non-communicating meter, that they're receiving they're foregoing the benefits of AMI. However, they're being charged extra money for getting fewer benefits. That seems to be contrary to a willing buyer and a willing seller type of thing, to a customer enhancement. It seems like you're saying you're getting less, but we're going to charge you more for it. It just seems odd.
You know, I can see why you would, I can understand that concern. When I think about it, because it's an active opt-out, you know, when customers and, you know, Mr. Holden can best speak to what some of those conversations sound like. But when they approach Northwestern to ask to opt out, that is a time when we will communicate to them the benefits by which they choose to opt out of. And so because the costs are associated with having that non-standard option available. And if the customer, in recognizing that opt-out also includes the opt-out of those additional benefits, you know, we do want to make sure they're making an informed decision. So that's where it's the pricing, the charging of those additional costs comes with the additional cost of that optional offering. And we would make sure that the customer is informed. And if you don't mind if I add one more piece, when you were talking about the possible alternative of retaining your AMR, keep in mind that our pricing proposal, the pricing for opt-out, did not consider that option. So one thing I do want to note is that in the event that that is an option that Northwestern would make available, certainly there would not be that one-time cost. You know, there'd be no cost of the meter, no need for cost of that installation. We do believe, though, that in that instance, it would appropriate to still have the monthly ongoing, because that no longer being our standard of service, it does require the additional truck roll to go by, and also probably some integration on the billing side, because it's not the same billing as the new standard.
Thank you. The Consumer Council made reference to rate basing. Okay. And another witness said that if an existing AMR meter fails, that it's going to be replaced from that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That type of regular maintenance is included in rate basing now. I should think it's a regular operating expense of the company to maintain existing equipment and whatever. That's normal course of events. So I'm still having trouble seeing that if meters are going to be replaced on an end of life basis, they're going to be replaced by something. Even if it requires a separate, if a meter fails, that one meter in a neighborhood, a truck is going to go out to replace that particular meter. So it's a service call not connected to a whole bunch of meters. It's a separate event. So I don't see why that is an additional charge to a customer when, as a matter of course, meters are expected to be replaced anyway. I fail to see that from a customer's point of view, why they're paying extra money for something that happens just as a matter of course anyway.
And I think the difference would be that, let's say, for example, that Northwestern, as a result of this, does end up with making 3 options available to customers, right? AMI, which will be the new standard option, the retention of AMR, and then the addition of the non-communicating meters. So for every single one of those options, at the end of life, the replacement, there would be no incremental charge for any customer, regardless of which of those 3 meters is their service. Where the additional charge comes in is with the opt-out, because opt-out falls outside of our deployment of AMI. And that's where that additional cost, that's where we see an additional cost associated with that. And because that's outside of schedule and outside of that regular service, that would show up for all of our customers. So that's why we included that as a separate cost. And
No, I thank you.
Okay.
I understand that from the company's point of view. It seems to be not very friendly to customers' point of view. So again, in referring that ARM 38.5-2603 and number 6, it says to promote customer choice. Okay, seems to me that the intention is to give preference to customers' wishes. So having them say, okay, but we're going to charge you more money seems to be contrary to that. But let me ask you another question.
Oh,
It's been referred to.
Commissioner O'Donnell, I
What?
think the witness probably want to respond to that statement since you made that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay,
is that okay?
sure, of course.
Yeah, where Northwestern's perspective on that is that we are trying to be responsive to customer choice and making sure our customers have the options that they need. But in addition to that, we also have to be thinking about the other customers that are not participating in the program and making sure that they are not overly burdened with bearing the full costs of making that option available. So when we looked at how did we choose to establish the charges, it was finding that balance between both customer groups. Because when it comes to customer choice, it seems unfair to have the customers that will not be electing that choice bear the full cost of that program.
Okay, we just have a very strong disagreement on that very much. I don't see it that way at all, but it has been referenced that it has been cited that whether or not they are real, that many people have very significant health concerns. Okay, and I'm sure we're familiar with the 2 listening sessions that this commission had on the meters, and that there was testimony, to me, was quite convincing of medical effects of exposure to this particular type of radiation, very significant medical effects. Do you feel that the company, by deploying these, I know it's hard to prove any of those things, but should a situation occur where somebody can definitely say that they were harmed by one of these meters, as has been alleged, do you feel, not acting for a legal opinion, do you think the company is assuming liability for harming somebody from putting out a meter like this that is wide knowledge that it could have harmful effects?
Madam Chair, I'd like the record to reflect that there has been absolutely no sworn testimony on the medical effects of AMI. That was public comment given in a different document.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. However, medical effects were mentioned. So that's what I was, and the previous witness said that in response to those, the information from Itron, the manufactured AMI meters, was sent to them, but the company has not stated anything about this. I'm just wondering, has the company taken into consideration, as far as you're aware, any concerns about possible health effects of these meters?
So if it's okay, I just put a little caveat in the front, given that I'm not an
Sure.
attorney, I'm uncomfortable speaking regarding liability. If I can speak to the other aspects of the question, would that be all right, Commissioner
Sure.
O'Donnell?
Thank you.
So I'm very aware that some customers do have concerns about some concerns about potential medical implications of this. One of the challenges in how we factor into this when we look at pricing and how do we go about this technology ends up being, if we are looking at an option that we do believe benefits our customers. We've seen multiple examples already where there have been material benefits, right? The ability for the utility to act before a problem happens is huge. It's a huge gain for our customers. So it's a challenge for us to think about how we balance that. And at the core of it, it ends up being and while some customers might have greater sensitivity, how do we know? Is it a doctor's note? Is it, like, how do we deal with something like that? And, okay, this is probably going to totally date me, but I remember when cell phones first started to happen. I know for some of you, you're like, what? There was a time when cell phones, but anyway, there was a lot of concern about what would it mean if you have this device like right by your head all the time. And, there were similar sort of concerns. Now I would be loath to imagine anybody. I know my kids, you try to take that phone away from them, right? So that has become a pervasive technology when at first there was a lot of concern. It's hard to know with this, what this is going to turn out to be given some of the concerns of customers. What we do believe is that some of the material benefits that we've seen already are important ones to bring to our customers. So some of the proactive the proactive action that Northwestern is now able to do because of the alerts is a huge safety benefit for our customers. The other thing too is the discussion about bill notices. That is an incredibly valuable tool for our customers. I've seen how some utilities, basically you can set up notices that tell you, like, let's say, because the whole idea that you don't know how much you're going to pay until the end of the month is a challenge. It's hard to budget, especially with changes in weather, which we see quite frequently here. The ability to inform a customer about this month compared to last month, I've seen some where like halfway into the billing cycle, they'll inform customers like, oh, you're using 10% more than you did last month, or, things like that. Those are invaluable tools for our customers that we would not be able to deliver without the AMI technology.
Well, thank you. But you just said something that strikes me as that I've never heard of this before. Are customers going to be able to have access to their usage in between monthly meter readings?
So when Mr. Thurman was talking about the interval reads, that's the result. So the simple fact that, and again, this is not my expertise. So I'm hoping Mr. Thurman and Mr. Holden are not going to scold me. But right now, the way the meter reads happen is we know where the beginning of the month and the end of the month. So it's basically two endpoints, right? To determine what their usage is. But with AMI technology, the ability to capture their usage every hour,
Right.
you can add it up.
But-
So,
But that's available to customers to have
well,
access
that's
to
what we're
that
working to
information?
get there.
Oh,
so that they
okay.
can-
Excuse me,
That's-
one at a time,
Okay,
please.
all right, I understand. All right, okay. Yeah. So that's in the future, but not the way it is. That's why I said that I thought that I missed something if that was the way it is now. So I thank you for the clarification.
We're getting there.
Great.
We're working very hard to get there.
Okay, very good. So when you said balance the benefits to a customer and you use the word balance, you didn't say the possible health concerns. You went back right away to the benefits. Do the health concerns, have they played any role in any discussions that you're aware of? Is the company aware of any possible effects that this would have on people? Is it of any concern to the company?
Well, our
As far as you're aware.
customers are our concern.
Right.
So when we hear about these health concerns, we absolutely are listening. Where the choice for AMI, it's the how do we balance the needs and concerns of all of our customers, which is why we're, the selection of the AMI as the standard. The question about how do we address some of these health concerns, I don't have firsthand knowledge. So
Okay.
as far as the specifics, what we've seen from other utility deployment is that there has not been, and again, I am not the expert, so this is just to my limited knowledge in this space. We're not seeing anything that would stop us from the deployment.
Thank you. Just one last point, and that is that I am aware that there is renewed serious scientific inquiry into the negative effects of cell phone usage to people using them. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay, so Commissioner O'Donnell is finished with his questioning. We are just about to the noon hour, so we will go ahead and take a lunch recess. It is 11:57 a.m. We will return at 1 p.m. and resume the hearing with commission questions for Ms. Fang. Thank you. We are now off the record.